now consider this program in session. And I would like to mention a few names before I bring on our speaker, and that is Anne Gaither. Anne Gaither is the CEO of Regal Africa, and she will type in her her website on the chat below so that you see what she does. She's a financial advisor and, kind of very much linked to what it is that we are trying to discuss today. And so she's our co-host. I would also like to mention Abojani, who are sponsoring this session today. Robert will be with us in a couple of minutes, and a few other speakers that I'll be mentioning as we go. But for now, I'm very, very happy to once again welcome my mentor for quite a while now, Mr. John Ngumi. John Ngumi, I will not go through your bio because it would take us quite a while. But what I will say is that you're the current chairman of ICDC, and your experience and history in the corporate sector, especially in banking, sets you apart, and it's very easy to find on the internet. So what we will say is thank you very much for agreeing to join us once again. And we are hoping to get the most out of this session. And as I said earlier, we have laid out some rules for the session, in that even though it's an Ask John Ngumi Anything, we are going to keep it respectful. We're going to keep it cordial and interactive and exciting, but we are not going to, we are not going to ask questions that really don't benefit any one of us. We are going to be seeking to learn about life, about how we should conduct ourselves with money, how we should make the most out of the opportunities that we find ourselves in, how to easily raise money, such like questions. And so without further ado, John, do you want to open with just a few minutes, and then we'll delve right into the questions because there are many.
Thank you, Irene. I'm not sure what precisely you want me to say at the beginning, but since you've asked me to say something, I will. One, thanks for setting the rules. B, thanks for inviting me. I will disclose to everybody that you never actually told me what you are calling me about. So I said yes, sight unseen. I saw the questions and I said, oops, okay. I will answer what I'm asked. I always answer questions. And I will endeavor to do that today. You may not like my answers, but I will ask questions. I have turned off my phone, but I have to warn you that given the work I do and who I do it for, there are a couple of calls that can bypass the silent mode. Hopefully it will not work. It will not come through today. Such calls won't come through today. If they do, then I will try and I will tell you, and I'll try and finish them as quickly as I can. I am actually in my office, so I do have a 9:30 hard stop. So other than that, go ahead, ask.
Thank you. So then I will start with the first one. And before I do, I see some people have joined from the US and from South Africa and from Zambia. I know some contacts there that I know they're out of the country. So everyone, welcome. And I will ask that you send me your email addresses in the email that I provided on the flyer, because then I can add you to future sessions. Mr. John Ngumi, the first one was, should we build a house in the village or should we start a business?
When I saw that question, I smiled, because if there is one person whom I know who is completely urbanized, it's me. My rural roots are pretty much non-existent, having been born in Nairobi, being brought up in Nairobi and elsewhere in the world. So I am not sure I am the right person to ask, but since you've asked, Should you build a house in the village or start a business? I'm a banker, therefore I will say start a business, mainly because a rural house in the village, unless you have loads and loads and loads of spare cash, is really dead capital. Not adding that it's, from what I've heard from many people, it's a source of much envy, jealousy, and attack. I presume, of course, that by saying you start a business, that doesn't mean that I'm not saying that you start a business in urban Kenya. I'm saying you start a business even in rural Kenya. But at the stage of where we are today, I am very hesitant to recommend building a house, a rural home, so to speak. But again, there are people who have deeper rural roots. There are people who call rural Kenya home. There are people who feel the call of home. And for those people, I cannot speak, the emotional attachment may be stronger. And in fact, I'm sure it's stronger than any rational economic calculation.
Okay. There'll probably be follow-up questions after that. And so then quickly, let's go to the next one. One of them, we had asked, should you, if you can, should you marry more than one wife? And that means, by if you can, means you can afford to take care of them. What's your thinking about that?
No, that question reminds me of the old adage, the old impossible to answer question, which is, have you stopped beating your wife? Answer yes or no. And it's either way, you're damned by that. And it's amusing how many people have zeroed in on that one when they have written to me. I think I will take the easy way out and say one wife at a time. It's much easier. It's much easier. Otherwise, we will debate the pros and cons of culture, and famous people had 4, 5, 6, 10 wives, and they all lived happily ever after. So why shouldn't I have more than one? I will dodge that particular bullet by saying one wife at a time.
Okay, I'm not even sure that everyone here agrees. Yeah, if you want answering it, I'm sorry, could I ask everyone to mute their, please mute yourselves until you get to your session to speak. If you could please mute your feed. So John, I was asking if you weren't going to answer, in what sounds politically correct, would you say, is there a chance that you might say yes? Are there different ways to look at this that would make polygamy desirable?
I went to school with people. I remember one particular schoolmate of mine from a quite a famous family. I recall we were in Form 2, and at that time his father had 6 wives and 54 children. And I can tell you that they were probably some of the happiest people I have met when I went to see them in their rural home. I have also come across quite a few ladies who have reached a stage in life where they have said, if the right man exists, if he's there, if he's a man who has been proven, I have no problem, despite my education and high ranking and whatever, being a second wife. And I can tell you of, or rather, I can think of a few, I won't mention any, who are perfectly happy, very successful, and have been second or third wives. Therefore, this is not a question that can be generalized in the answer. But if I may stick my neck out, I will go as far as to say it is not automatically bad to have more than one wife. And I will not go beyond there. Irene, so go to the next question that you have.
I got that. And then let's go to the dowry question. And it's just basically to do with money. There are expectations that if you're going to get married, then perhaps the in-laws expect that you would pay dowry in full or whatever. So paying dowry in full versus expectations of society and how much money you hold and how wanting the family to kind of start off without much debt. What's your advice on the fact that people acknowledge that they probably should pay dowry? So how do you pay without getting in trouble financially?
Right. First of all, my father paid my dowry. My father-in-law was a very reasonable man, and all he asked for was the traditional Kikuyu dowry, nothing really fancy. I paid dowry for one of my sons, and for the second one, even though his wife is European, I did in a way pay dowry by granting her some property. My experience has been good. My experience, and even where I have been part of a dowry negotiating team for friends and for children of friends, the negotiations have been okay. Nothing, I've never really gone to one where it became unreasonable. I remember way back in the early 70s, in the coffee boom era, in the mid 70s, there was persistent talk of people asking for a Range Rover or a BMW. They had just begun coming to Kenya as dowries. And I have a feeling, and this is just a feeling completely untested, that it does truly depend on what you have sold to the young lady and I'm not talking as a man, what you sold to the young lady and to the young lady's family. If all you sold is wealth and material standing, I have no doubt that they will go out and ask you for that. So I think that, again, it's a question that really that is driven by personal circumstances. Do I know people who have paid dowry or rather who have, because there is a disconnect in your question in the sense that dowry is normally paid by the father. Do I know people whose fathers have gone completely broke? No, but I know fathers who have strained and whom we have had to help. Do I know people who, for one reason or another, had to pay dowry themselves and have found it a strain? No, I haven't, but I have heard of such people, but I don't have any knowledge of anybody who's had a complete financial break in after paying dowry. Now, do I believe in paying dowry? Because I think that's an auxiliary question that will come. I think it's good. I think it's a mark of respect. B, it's a mark of value, of realizing that there's value in what you are. There's value in what you are getting in return. It does, for men, focus the mind quite a bit. Yes, I know some of us then translate that to treating wives as chattels and possessions. But I don't think that those cases should damn the general case for dowry. I like it. I support it for those communities that do it.
Okay. Just one more along those lines. If you find that a young couple get together and being of a younger generation, they don't see why they should get together, but the parents would expect that you have to pay dowry and you have to pay this much, which means it might be unreasonably high. how do you negotiate that without alienating both sides of the in-laws?
Oh, wow. That's a provocative question, and I'll give you a provocative answer. People idealize marriages. I know that in my parents' generation, eloping and creating facts on the ground in the shape of little babies was quite common. I attended my parents' wedding when I was, I think, 4. And that was the kind of man my father was. So I have no objection. I am a product of a marriage after the fact, and I have no objection to it. So I have no objection to a young couple saying to the parents, while you think about it, we will go ahead.
Okay, and my last one before I call on Angaida to give us some of the listed questions, very heated ones, I can see some of them. Education versus what's available to us once we graduate. There are those who would argue that outside of a basic education, maybe your first degree, then what you need to do is go find means of, livelihood means, either a job or start a business, or not spend too much time going to school, especially given a country like Kenya where you're not assured of getting a commensurate job after all these degrees. What's your view? Is it relevant to keep going for the higher education and keep pushing and getting in debt doing so?
Tough question, and one that's obviously topical. First, remember that for a lot of people, a lot of families, especially those who are from the lower income classes, those who have less reliable income sources, those who have had to strain a lot to pay school fees, there is an expectation, and that expectation is not unreasonable, that the education that you get will lead to material benefits in terms of jobs, and that will in turn lead to you helping your parents, your siblings, and others. So for us and for our circumstances, the absolute necessity of using education as a tool to better oneself materially is not unreasonable, because so many people have come from exactly those circumstances of others having to sacrifice for them. If the question is then turned around and said, should you keep on educating for education's sake and enter into huge debt, going into masters and PhD programs? The answer to that must be one of two. Either you are going into something so specialized that you need that further education, which ultimately will make the sacrifice others worth it, or you cannot do that at the expense of those who then have to help you get there, because I am not sure that in Kenya anyway, we are yet at that stage where we have education loans of sufficient size to be able to allow you to be a perpetual student. And almost inevitably, you will resort to asking your parents or your family or others to support that. And I think it is manifestly unfair to do so if all you're doing it for is because you are in love with education for education's sake. Sounds very pragmatic, very practical, not at all romantic as it would be in other countries and places. But I don't agree at the moment that I don't agree that you have a right to be that selfish unless there is another end which will ultimately with the sacrifices that people have made on your behalf be beneficial to them. Very utilitarian, but that's just the blunt reality as I see it.
Okay, and before I call on Anne, then what you're saying is find a job or start a business along the same line. Would you say this is in Kenyan context? Instead of feeling that, because when we were growing up, the idea from our parents was that finish school and get a good job. Does that still apply? Should we relook at our goals?
But even in our times, there were those who finished school or did not finish school and went and started a business. Entrepreneurship or among the youth did not start today. I have a lot of people who left school with me who have never held a paid employment. So I'm not sure that it is an either or. I think the concept of the youth being entrepreneurial has always been there. The concept of youth being entrepreneurial while in college and starting businesses while in college has always been there. It's probably more pronounced now because we are more people and there is more visibility about what people are doing. But I don't agree that it is an either or choice.
Okay. So Anne, some of the questions coming through, which ones are you going to start with?
Okay, thanks, Irene, and thanks, Mr. Ngumi, for your very straight answers there. Of course, there are over 100 people here listening to what you have to say and just getting great insights. So the first question we have is sort of tied to what we were just talking about, right? So we have somebody here who says they've recently been employed, but now they're wondering, should they start building a home or should they start income generating activities? So there's this Kenyan thing of always having side hustles. So the question is, they're employed now, the money they're making, should they start building a home or should they now have a side hustle? What are your thoughts?
Interesting question. Let me answer it indirectly and then I'll come to it. When I was in banking, I used to observe a very interesting phenomenon among our young entrants. They had to stay for 6 months up to 2 years, for between 6 months up to 2 years before they were allowed to take on the very, very generously priced, very cheap staff loans in banks. And whenever they became eligible, there was always, without exception, a distinct difference between young men and young women. The young men would buy Subarus, or if they were better paid, they would buy BMW, they would buy very loud musical equipment. The young ladies would continue driving a matatu or rather driving in a matatu, but would always buy a plot of land or a flat or something. And within 10 years, the young ladies were flourishing, flourishing property owners, while the young men were wondering how the devil they would get their first house ever. It's a question of a delayed gratification. Young man wants to build a home. Why? It's because we have this belief ingrained in us, unconscious, that you need to own your home, which is it's very English, very American, and very African concept, and not one that is very prevalent elsewhere. What's wrong with renting? What's wrong with not starting a business and then not letting that business do the building of your house through the income that it generates? I certainly wish I'd done that when I was a young banker, and I would say that the building of the house seems to me to be either to be a consequence of either family pressure, especially from your wife. I've come from a good home. I've come from a home where my father owns the home. Therefore, I expect also to live in my own home. I don't want us to rent because renting is bad and all the arguments about the increase in the value of property over time, or it could be peer pressure, or it could be simply the man putting pressure upon himself to build a home for his people, because a real man owns a house. I know people in London, the multi-millionaires who up to today live in apartments, live on River Thames in a river boat, don't have houses anywhere else, which they call their own in that regard, but instead they invest in, say, apartment blocks, which bring them in a tidy amount of revenue. It's the same question you hear when somebody says that I've made a bit of money, therefore I have to go and have a house in Mombasa, in Diani, in Vipingo, because everybody else is having a house there. Forgetting that that's why people invented hotels and villas for rental. Why not go and rent a villa and let your money do something else? So I am afraid that my answer to that is that pressure it is, if you can resist that pressure and instead accelerate your income generating capabilities. Now, of course, you may end up having a business that fails, and I have had several businesses that have failed at my hands, but that is why you're called a risk taker.